The Big Show.
You know what? You know why I love Booger? I love Booger for several reasons. First of all, the guy, he's a grown man. His name is Booger. I mean, think about that. That's amazing. And he doesn't even like it. Booger, you don't like it when people call you Anthony, correct?
Absolutely, man. Like nobody calls me Anthony anymore. I think that's that's kind of how I distinguish whether or not I know someone. If I hear, "Hey, Anthony," I usually don't turn around.
So it's brilliant, by the way, because it's such a recognizable name. You can check him out on Twitter at ESPN Booger. Because I remember when you and I were first doing shows on Sirius together, my wife was like, "You should stop calling him Booger." I'm like, no, you don't get it. Like, that's his name. And he likes it. She's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, she's like, "It's a nickname." I'm like, no. Like, it's his name now. So we had, I mean, literally, I can't remember when we did that show. It was at least 5 years ago. And I still get people on Facebook or Twitter that mention that show. So I'm just telling you guys right now, I don't know when or how, but some point it's going to circle back around. Maybe it's like Apple or Amazon figures out, you know what? We should get Ross and Booger back together and do something. Somehow we're going to get back together. So I love his name. I love when we did the show together. I love that you're a listener. I would say like once a month, Booger will like text me something from the show and I'll be like, "Oh, he was listening," which I love, man. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, man, no problem. I especially enjoy some of the episodes when you're like, "Hey, man, so tell me about something about your wife." You're like, "Well, I'm actually divorced," and I just die laughing because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to do so many shows and have so many things going through your head, and something like that slips through the cracks, and then you're like, "Oh," especially on like a live recorded show. It's not like you can go back and edit it out. It's just funny to me. That's why I always text you, and I just die laughing.
That was Kelsey's dad. I said, "So why weren't you sitting? Why were you sitting with Don? Why were you sitting with your wife?" He's like, "Well, first of all, we're divorced."
It's the best, dude.
I didn't know. I mean, it's so funny. You'd think there was so much coverage of it, Super Week. You would think I would have known that. The whole week they were talking about Kelsey's mom and dad, but they never mentioned that, or I never heard that. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that, nor would I assume that either, like you did.
I didn't assume that they were still married. I just thought it was, I just didn't realize that they didn't sit next to each other. Whatever, dude. I can't be doing everything. literally later that day, Booger sends me a text, and all it says is, "Actually, we're divorced."
It was the best, dude. I was driving down the road dying laughing because I know exactly how that goes, man.
Oh, it was so great. All right. Anyway, dude, how wild is it, by the way, how much he sounds like Jason?
Yeah, that's unreal, dude. Especially, I guess it shouldn't be that big of a surprise. I mean, that is his dad, but I think we're always amazed when parents have kids look, sound like parents, or have the same mannerism. Hey, didn't you make them? Like, shouldn't they look or sound like you? It's amazing how amazed we are when we see situations like that.
What else did he say that was so funny? Oh, my favorite was like when he said, you could tell at a young age that Jason and Travis had more God-given ability than some of the other kids. Really? You think? They're both going to the Hall of Fame. You think?
Yeah, that's classic.
It's awesome. All right. So there's several things I want to get to with you. I want to start because I like to talk with you, and you know this, about what I believe are on some level racial issues that you and I are close enough and comfortable enough that we can talk about these things. I want to start with Shady McCoy's comments as it relates to Eric Bienemy, because it feels like there's like two camps. And if you guys didn't hear it, Shady McCoy, LaShawn McCoy, basically said, "Listen, I was there. I was in Kansas City. Bienemy doesn't have anything to do with the passing game. That's all Andy. It was Andy and Mahomes. Like, I was there. Bienemy doesn't really do much with the passing game." which, his background's a running back coach, whatever. And Shady said, I love Bienemy. I hope he has success, but my job now is to be honest and tell the truth. And it felt like some people appreciated that and thought, okay, this guy's in the media now. It's his job to tell the truth. He doesn't have a beef with this guy. He says he loves him.
Right.
He has success, hopes he gets a head coaching job. But then I saw a number of people that just felt like you don't go there. You don't do that. It's hard enough these days for black coaches to get a chance to be a head coach, that they didn't appreciate that Shady McCoy said that. And I just want to give you a blank canvas. I have no idea what you think. Your thoughts on what Shady said. Is he doing his job and just being honest, or do you not do that because whatever you want to say, you don't want to hurt guys that you're trying to help prop up?
Well, I think this situation in particular, you have to look at and you have to dissect it. I think Eric Bienemy, because he's had, 17 interviews with 16 teams trying to get a head coaching job, because it's gone on so long, because he's had so much success in Kansas City, because he's an African-American coach that has gone through all of this and has yet to get a job. I think there's a little angst out there amongst former players, amongst writers, amongst everyone, because from a deserving standpoint, I think he deserves a job based on the people that have been hired during those 16 or 17 interviews where he hasn't gotten a job, because his credentials say, hey, I deserve a job based on 2 Super Bowl wins, based on Patrick Mahomes, based on being involved with the Kansas City Chiefs, because how many other people have gotten a job? Doug Peterson, Matt Nagy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's that. Then there's the fact, I think, Ross, when it comes to African-American players, people, writers in general, that say, hey, if you don't have anything positive to say, don't say anything negative about said black coaches, whether it's Eric Bienemy or not, who are trying to get a job, because there's enough negativity going around out there from owners who won't hire them. There's enough negativity going around out there that we, as African-American people, don't need to put our own people down. And so I think that's why it's looked at, even if Shady McCoy was telling the truth. I don't know. I wasn't in those installed meetings. It's kind of what goes on in there, the people that go on in there, those people know. I don't know. I thought Eric Bienemy's comments were really good by saying, hey, Shady's a Hall of Fame type player. I'm not going to say anything bad. I'm going to take the high road. But the fact is that you shouldn't, there's a feeling you shouldn't say anything, even if it's true. You should be quiet, because the road that's traveled by the black assistant coach is tough enough. You don't need to make it tougher by quote unquote telling the truth, even if it is the truth. And I think that's why it's kind of frowned upon and it's looked at from a negative aspect, Ross.
How do you feel about that? I feel like Ross, you pride yourself on calling it like you see it. I mean, I'm not going to say you're Charles Barkley, but I feel like I had you on after your Zach Wilson comments that I didn't agree with, but you say what you think and you believe what you say. Which side of it are you on?
I think regardless whether Eric Bienemy had anything to do with the passing game or not, I think Eric Bienemy has proven he should be an NFL head coach. So I think two things can be at play and both can be correct. Shady McCoy can be correct, but to me it doesn't matter. I think Eric Bienemy has earned the right based on the people that have been hired by owners, and you can go down the list. We don't need to list them. I think he has earned the right by being associated. If that's all that you want to say he did, was associated with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's the guy who is, quote unquote, touching Andy Reid's cloak. How many people have touched Sean McVay's cloak that have got a head coaching job? Okay, so if you just want to put Eric Bienemy in that camp, he deserves a job. So I think two things can be true at the same time. I think Shady McCoy can be correct because he was in that meeting room, right? Shady McCoy knows what goes on in there. And I don't think we can say he's just flat-foot lying. I haven't heard anybody say he was lying. I've heard people defend Eric Bienemy by saying he's a great coach, but I haven't heard, and you correct me if I'm wrong, have you heard anyone who has said, Shady, that's a lie? I haven't heard that. I've heard people defending Bienemy by saying he deserves it, his accolades, et cetera, et cetera. So I think both things can be true, and I'm fine with that. To me, that doesn't matter if it's true or not. it matters that Eric Bienemy, based on what he has done and what the Kansas City Chiefs have achieved, deserves to be a head coach in this league. And we can talk about the interview process and whether you interview well. Here's what I know, Ross, and you know this. Coaching football is not about interviewing with a suit and tie on. It's about how can you relate to players? How can you lead men? And I think we have to look at that. The owners, the 31 owners and the Green Bay Packers have to look at that and say, okay, am I interviewing a guy to put a suit and tie on every day? Or am I interviewing a guy to put shorts and t-shirt on and stand in front of 53 men and lead them and put them in the best position to win? I think that's something that the owners have to take a serious look at in the offseason.
I'm glad you said that because I talked about that last week. I don't really know the answer to that. It's one of the reasons why it took Mike Zimmer years to get a head coaching job is because he was gruff with the owners. He wasn't sort of what they had in mind as being the face of their franchise, the guy at every press conference talking with the media. I think Zimmer told him what he thought. And I think the owners wanted to hear what they wanted to hear, and Zimmer wasn't here for it. I think it's a really interesting question. I was going to ask you that, how important you think the interview process is. But I mentioned this last week, Booger. I think it was last Monday. I have interns for RT Media and Go Big Recruiting and My Front Page Story. I talked to them on the phone. Boy, it's hard to pick one that the interview doesn't go well. I mean, it's really hard. Now, these aren't as extensive interviews what NFL teams do, but it's really hard to, let's say I'm having one intern. I talked to 3 kids, and maybe the one on his resume looked the best, but if the interview goes really bad, he's quiet or I don't like what he said. I mean, that's hard. That's asking a lot, I feel like.
It's asking a lot, Ross, and that's why I think you should go back and look at what their coach has done. I think when you look at, and I'm not just picking on this guy. Let's look at Kevin O'Connell. Let's look at Matt LaFleur. Let's look at some of these coaches. Hell, let's look at these 2 guys from the Eagles that just got hired. Like when you look at Gannon and you look at these guys, Ross, think about what they did. Their accolades and what they did on their specific side of the ball led them to get a head coaching job. We didn't talk about, well, did they interview well or did they not? I think the reason people wanted to hire Gannon and people wanted to hire Kevin O'Connell and people wanted to hire Matt LaFleur and on and on and on is because of what they did on their respective former teams on that particular side of the ball. So if you're going to hold the same criteria, then Eric Bienemy is more than qualified. Patrick Mahomes, here's the thing I know. Regardless of who calls the plays, tell me this, Ross, when you watch the Kansas City Chiefs, I think there's 2 guys on the sideline holding a play sheet, Andy Reid and Eric Bienemy. So that tells me both guys are involved regardless of who calls the plays. And so if we're going to look at that offense, which was number 1 in pretty much every category, they've won 2 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. They've gone to 5 straight AFC championship games. Patrick Mahomes is undoubtedly the best quarterback in the National Football League. They lose Tyreek Hill, and the offense still continues to go. Even if you said that Andy Reid is calling the plays, and Andy Reid is 65% of all that success, you got to give Eric Bienemy the other 35. So based just on that, with all the credentials that they have achieved, shouldn't he deserve a job? I think that's the way I look at it. It doesn't matter who's calling the plays. It matters that he is a part of the success. And all he wants the opportunity to do is lead his own team and have a larger percentage of the pie.
I want to move on to Russell Wilson because there's some news with him since last Thursday's Greg Cosell episode. And the news came from The Athletic that Russell Wilson tried to get John Schneider and Pete Carroll fired. Reportedly, he has denied that. It's interesting, Booger, between him having an office at the facility and between this, why do I feel like none of this stuff would have come out if he played well this past year? You know what I mean? It's funny that all this stuff, why do you feel like Russell Wilson is kind of like a punching bag now?
Well, I think because he played really, really poor last year. And I think Russ comes off as this guy who's perfect. He comes off as the perfect player. Go Hawks, Broncos, let's ride. I'm going to always do the right thing. He is phenomenal off the field when it comes to his work in the community with the hospital and visiting the hospital. He and his wife does a phenomenal job. his family, quote unquote, people look at as the perfect family. I think people look at Russ and say Russ is just too perfect. So when we find a chink in the armor, i.e., he didn't play well, now we want to understand why. And then all the things that, if you believe him or not, start to come from the dark to the light. And I think that's the reason why people, I don't know if it's punch at Russell Wilson, Ross. I think people just say, ha, I knew you wasn't that perfect. I knew you weren't that, quote unquote, just squeaky clean. And as it pertains to the article in The Athletic, Ross, there's a lot of detailed reporting in there, Ross, to say it's all a lie. There's a lot of, I read it, and whether or not you want to believe 100% of it, I tell you what, it's hard to say you don't believe any of it. And whatever percentage you want to believe, it just tells you that here's a guy who, from a power standpoint, believed that his power got to a point where he could have the GM and the head coach fired. And Ross, if you don't believe that, then tell me why the Seattle Seahawks traded a quarterback that's probably the best in their franchise ever, a guy who had been so successful. They just traded him away almost in the middle of the night. And so I tend to believe a lot of the article, Ross, and I think it just shows you, A, how successful Russ has been to feel as if he can do some of those things, and B, it just goes to show you that at some point, regardless of how much power you get, there's a level of humility that you must have, because if you don't, it'll come back to bite you in the butt. And I think everything and all the criticism that Russ has received, I think it's warranted based on some of the things that he's done. But Ross, football is the ultimate team sport. Not that the quarterback is not treated differently, not that the quarterback doesn't act differently, not that the quarterback should not be different. But when you alienate yourself with offices and telling guys to come meet you in your office, when you alienate yourself by always trying to be different, then the guys in that locker room sometimes don't accept you. And then on top of all that, Ross, I think you hit the nail on the head. When you don't play well and you do those things, it becomes a bigger issue. If Russ was the MVP of the league last year, nobody would say anything whatsoever. But Russ arguably was one of the worst quarterbacks in football last year. And so he has to own that because that's his performance. And so now everything you do is going to be scrutinized. So, yeah, it's tough being at the top of the hill, but it's tough also falling down, especially when some of the things you do on that fall kind of led to the fall, so to speak.
Is he salvageable, do you think?
I don't know. I think when you look at Sean Payton, if we're going to talk X's and O's, Sean Payton has always been a coach that put the quarterback in position to get rid of the ball quick. Drew Brees never held the football. Drew Brees got rid of the ball. Drew Brees didn't have a big arm, but that offense was putting up points because the quarterback was precise, accurate. He delivered the football on time. He knew where to go. He knew where to go with it. I don't think all those things are going to fit Russell. Like Russell at his best has been a quarterback that's been a great deep ball thrower. He has been a very improvisational quarterback when it comes to creating plays outside of the pocket. But as far as saying Russell has been a rhythm and timing player, I don't think Russ has ever been rhythm and timing. Well, that offense in New Orleans under Sean Payton was always rhythm and timing. So it's kind of like oil and water. We're going to see if Sean Payton can salvage Russell or if Russell will change his game. I know one thing. When you get to be a certain age, I don't care what profession you're in, it's hard to go back and change. I would lean toward I don't think he's salvageable. However, I do believe Sean Payton is one of the best coaches in the National Football League. So they will figure out a way to move the football. I just don't know over the course of his contract whether or not he's going to stay the whole time in Denver because of what Sean Payton wants and because of the expectations that the ownership group in Denver has. Because when you pay a quarterback, or excuse me, when you pay a head coach, whatever the number is, $15, $20 million that Sean Payton is making, you expect the championship at some point. And I think Sean is going to know, hey, I need better play or I need different play in order to do it.
Check him out on social media at ESPN Booger. He is outstanding, and he's all over Saturday college football, Monday night countdown, and he's a listener just like you guys. Thanks, buddy. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, buddy. Take it easy.